Hello, everybody. Friends near and far, all together in the vast luminosity of awake mind. Nothing separates us. We are one at the root. We are one at the root. And ultimately, one also in the fruit. It's the stem part where we sometimes get into trouble, so we're going to look at some of that today. We're going to start with our opening prayers, and I will just read them, knowing that you may be more familiar with a different translation. That's fine. And also in our sanghas, sometimes we have sat with a shorter rendition of the opening prayers. But I learned over years of practice, solo practice in retreats of varying lengths, how profound and powerful is the recitation of an extended practice of opening and closing prayers, in which we're generating the aspirations that take us from where we are now to a remembrance of the ultimate state, which is our natural state, and the remembrance of the great devotion that we generate to our teachers and to our lineages who guide us along the path, helping us walk wisely and gently and courageously from inception to completion. So this is a fairly extended reading of opening prayers, and please just align our minds. Let's align our minds together with the ultimate intention to lift all beings from ignorance into the natural state, what we call the absolute or the ultimate state. And the warmth of that aspiration, the bodhicitta, that warmth that burns away afflictions and melts, as Garchen Rinpoche says so often to us with such kindness, it melts away the ice block of the mind, so that the mind is free to flow in its natural state of water under every bridge, over every impediment, sweeping away the debris and the detritus of the confusion states that we have some familiarity with, and bringing us to the ocean mind, vast, limitless, profound. So, thank you for being here. I know some of you who are looking at into the camera, and we are a number of nations gathered today, and people from all over. We are also unseen, gathered together, as to any Dharma. All beings are invited. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are invited. The guests of the 6 realms are invited. We welcome all sentient beings. The first prayers are refuge and generation of bodhicitta, and the first one is to generate the altruistic motivation. All mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. All mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. All mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. The action bodhicitta prayer. For that purpose, until I attain Buddhahood, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. Until death, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. From today until this time tomorrow, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. Generating bodhicitta. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhicitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhicitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhicitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. Then the short refuge prayer. Until awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Until awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Until awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. The four immeasurables. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. And then we offer the mandala, the complete offering of all that is lovely and of value. An infinite array of worlds, each with 4 continents, and the wealth of infinite oceans of realms, if I bring them all to mind and offer them without exception, please hold with compassion all the beings they contain. My body, enjoyments, and whatever I own, my aggregates, elements, and sense sources, my aspirations now and in times to come, as well as everything I grasp as mine, by offering them all may I be blessed with the end of self-grasping. Completely liberated from the bounds of real and unreal, transcending the names and concepts of arising, cessation, and abiding, coming and going, affirmation and denial, the supreme mandala is the natural state. By offering it, may I be blessed to attain the state of Buddhahood. Om Guru Deva Dakini Ratna Mandala Pratitsa Soha. Guru Supplication. Namo. To the Guru, the utter purity of all appearance and existence, I offer all appearance and existence arisen as the primordial ground. I supplicate you. May the three realms be completely liberated. Please grant blessings to empty samsara from its depths. Lord with 5 omniscient wisdoms, crown ornament, kind one with loving nature, precious protector of beings, heart of all Buddhas, inexpressible by words or thought, I supplicate you from the core of my mind. Bless me from within the state of Dharmata. Bless me to realize this mind, primordially pure and unborn, as the unfathomable Dharmakaya. Please turn the wheel of the Dharma, of the greater and lesser vehicles, and the teachings common to both, according to the dispositions and mental capacities of sentient beings. Now we'll do the recitation of the 37 Bodhisattva practices, familiar to many of us through many years of receiving them over and over again from our wonderful teachers. And these are really heart teachings of Garchen Rinpoche, His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche. So each of us has also received them directly from him. And for any who have not received the transmission of this text, this will be the transmission of the text for you, called the reading transmission. Namo Lokeshvaraya. While seeing that all phenomena neither come nor go, you strive solely for the sake of all beings. Supreme Guru and Protector Chenrezig, at all times I respectfully pay homage to you with my body, speech, and mind. The perfect Buddhas, source of all benefit and happiness, arise from having accomplished the true Dharma. Since that depends on knowing the practices, I shall explain the way of Bodhisattvas. Having now gained this great ship of freedom and fortune so difficult to find, in order to free yourself and others from the ocean of cyclic existence, listen, reflect, and meditate day and night without distraction. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Attachment to loved ones churns like water. Hatred for enemies rages like fire. In the darkness of ignorance, one forgets what to adopt and what to avoid. Abandon your homeland. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When negative places are abandoned, disturbing emotions will gradually decline. Without distractions, attention to virtue naturally grows. When the mind becomes clear, certainty in the Dharma arises. Live alone in seclusion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Family and longtime companions will part from each other. Possessions gained with effort will be left behind. Consciousness, a guest, will leave the guest house of the body. Let go of all worldly concerns. This is the way of a bodhisattva. In bad company, the 3 poisons grow stronger. The activities of learning, reflecting, and meditating decline, and love and compassion are lost. Give up such companions. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When one follows a true spiritual friend, faults will dissolve and good qualities will grow like the waxing moon. Consider this friend more dear than your own body. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Who can worldly gods, themselves imprisoned in samsara, protect? Therefore seek refuge in the 3 jewels, the undeceiving source of refuge. This is the way of a bodhisattva. The Buddha taught that all the unbearable suffering of the lower realms is caused by wrongdoing. Therefore, never act wrongfully, even at the cost of your life. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Like a dewdrop on a blade of grass, the happiness of the 3 worlds vanishes in but an instant. Strive for the supreme state of never-changing liberation. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When mothers who've loved you since beginningless time are suffering, what good is your own happiness? Therefore give rise to bodhicitta in order to liberate infinite sentient beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. All suffering without exception comes from seeking your own happiness. The perfect Buddhas are born from the altruistic mind. Therefore truly exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone driven by great desire steals all your wealth or lets others steal it, dedicate to them your body, possessions, and all virtues of the 3 times. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone cuts off your head when you haven't done anything wrong, take all their negative deeds upon yourself through the power of compassion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if others slander you throughout a billion worlds, in return speak with a loving mind of their good qualities. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone exposes your hidden faults and insults you in front of others, view that person as a teacher and bow with respect. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone you've cared for as dearly as your own child regards you as an enemy, love that person even more as a mother would her ailing child. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone of equal or lower status, driven by pride, treats you with disdain, respectfully place them on your crown as your teacher. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Though you may be impoverished, always disparaged, gripped by disease, and tormented by spirits, never lose courage but take on the misdeeds and pains of all beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Though you may be famous and revered by many, and are as rich as the wealth god himself, having seen that worldly fortune is without essence, do not be proud. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If the enemy, your own anger, is not tamed, subduing outer enemies will only make them increase. Therefore subdue your own mind with the army of love and compassion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Sensory pleasures are like salt water. The more you drink, the greater your thirst. Abandon at once all things that give rise to clinging attachment. This is the way of a bodhisattva. The way things appear is your own mind. Mind itself primordially transcends fabricated extremes. Knowing just this, do not create concepts of subject and object. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When you come across things that attract you, like beautiful rainbows in summertime, do not regard them as real and abandon clinging attachment. This is the way of a bodhisattva. All suffering is like the death of your child in a dream. How exhausting it is to hold illusory appearances as real. Therefore, when you meet with difficult circumstances, see them as illusory. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When even one's body must be given up when aspiring for enlightenment, what need is there to mention material things? Therefore, practice generosity without hope of reward or karmic results. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If you lack moral discipline, you cannot accomplish even your own purpose. So wanting to achieve the purpose of others is truly absurd. Therefore, protect your discipline without concern for worldly existence. This is the way of a bodhisattva. For bodhisattvas who desire a wealth of virtue, all harm is like a precious treasure. Therefore, without hostility, be patient with everyone. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even hearers or solitary realizers who accomplish only their own purpose strive as if putting out a fire on their head. Seeing this, practice with diligence the source of good qualities for the sake of all beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Disturbing emotions are destroyed by insight, grounded in calm abiding. Knowing this, cultivate meditative concentration that purely transcends the four formless absorptions. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Without wisdom, the other five perfections alone are not enough to reach complete enlightenment. Thus, combined with skillful means, develop the wisdom that does not distinguish among the three spheres. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Unless you examine your own confused ideas, you might look like a practitioner but not be acting like one. Therefore, always examine yourself and abandon confusion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If you are driven by disturbing emotions and talk about another bodhisattva's faults, it is actually to your own detriment. So don't mention the faults of those who've entered the great vehicle. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Concern for gain and respect causes conflict and a decline in the activities of learning, reflecting, and meditating. So abandon attachment to your circle of friends, relations, and benefactors. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Harsh words disturb others' minds and thus diminish the practice of a bodhisattva. Therefore, abandon harsh speech, which is unpleasant to others. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When disturbing emotions become habitual, it is difficult to reverse them with antidotes. Thus, the soldier of mindfulness wields antidotes as weapons and destroys disturbing emotions such as attachment the moment they start to arise. This is the way of a bodhisattva. In brief, wherever you are and whatever you are doing, always examine the state of your mind. act to accomplish the purpose of others through constant mindfulness and awareness. This is the way of a bodhisattva. With the wisdom of threefold purity, dedicate all the virtue gained from having made such effort toward enlightenment. Dedicate it to clear away the suffering of infinite beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. And His Eminence, Garchen Rinpoche, has requested during this time of the pandemic, coronavirus that is sweeping the globe, that 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening we recite 4 lines from Shantideva's dedication for the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. And these four lines, I will read them once and then we can recite them together. It's so short that maybe you can take it down. Maybe you can write it down as I read it slowly first, and then we can recite it together. And then from then on until the completion of this cycle of disease, maybe you would be willing to join us in reciting these 4 lines 3 times every morning and 3 times every evening. And Rinpoche has asked that we generate 100 million recitations of this verse. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. I'll read it once more slowly and then we'll do the recitation. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. And for those of you for whom English is not a familiar language, the word malady means illness at the end of the 2nd line. So 3 times together. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. Thank you. I want to share with you, and I don't exactly know how it's all going to come out in terms of words, but I want to share with you this afternoon, and really it's the theme of our whole retreat, this afternoon and this evening and all day tomorrow, some teachings and practice that may be of help to us in this historical global moment. And when I reflected on what was the moment in which I met essence teachings of the Buddha Dharma that cut through the miasma of quite a serious illness that I was experiencing at a certain time in my life many years ago. What I recalled instantly was my meeting with what is colloquially called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but it is called in Tibetan, although I don't speak Tibetan and won't pronounce it correctly, the Bardo Thotrol, which are the liberation through hearing in the Bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth, referred to as the Bardo. Colloquially, when we think of Bardo, we think of that period. Although there are many different Bardos, there's 6 major ones. We'll touch on those. But Bardo also is happening for us all the time in our lives. It's a gap between the known and the unknown, a gap between that which can be cognized and that which is perhaps overwhelmingly experienced, a gap between what makes sense and what doesn't, and the gap through which new sense may arise. So without going into much detail, I was quite ill, and I sensed that the possibility of dying was there. It wasn't a real concern of mine, but I sensed that it was there as a possibility. But mostly what I was experiencing was being laid low. I was unable even to lift my hand from the bed. That's how weak I felt. And I could make no sense at all over what was happening. It was an early period in my formal spiritual study in this lifetime. And I didn't have many concepts to work with, and I had very little accessible wisdom to work with. And so I was just lying there day after day. People were coming to help. And then some of my dear students picked me up and took me to the nearest large city, about 5 or 6 hours away, and found a wonderful acupuncturist from Korea who, when I walked into his office, I didn't know I was going to mention this. I went over to greet him respectfully, and he opened his mouth, and his mouth was completely filled with blood. I mean, but really filled with blood, dark blood. And I thought, this is very alarming. What should I make of this? And then I realized I could not make anything of this whatsoever. And the story in the material reality was that he had just had several teeth pulled all at once at the same time. So it was very kind of, maybe not to him and his experience was it trivial, but it was trivial compared to the gaping bloody mouth that I was perceiving. And so that was my introduction to the next phase of this adventure of being extremely ill. And so I was there. Good, very dear friends took care of me while I was there for several months, having very intensive acupuncture. And he said near the end of the process that I had in fact been dying, and that it was a good thing I got there when I did. And but then I was taken back to my little corner of New England at the time, and I began to study this book, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thotrol. And though the images and the language and the description of events and what happens at different times in the intermediate period between death and rebirth were not particularly accessible to me, let's say. I can't say they weren't meaningful, but they weren't accessible. I couldn't work with an ordinary cognitive awareness with this imagery. But what I did just instinctively was what many, many, many years later, Garchen Rinpoche told me was basically my core practice, which was to take the essence of every teaching I ever received and the essence of every practice that I was ever given, and to study and practice on that essence. And that's what I was doing when I was working during that period of illness and recovery, working with the Bardo Thotrol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the essence that I took from this profound teaching, this is a treasure text, meaning a dharma, a discovered treasure, by Padmasambhava, also known as Guru Rinpoche, who hid many such treasures in various ways to be found in later eras when they were ripe for the understanding and in the time of need of sentient beings throughout the earth. So to read this text or to hear it read aloud for somebody who's practicing for you at your bedside as you are dying, or in the 49-day period following your death, to hear this text is to hear the teachings of the ultimate state being given as a guide for moving through and working with and mastering the transformations of the relative states that we call samsara, which include the states that one experiences at times of great crisis, such as dying, and potentially repetitive crises, as when we are in the period between the dying moment and the moment of either liberation, ultimate liberation, or the moment of taking rebirth yet again. The teaching that was very clearly conveyed as the essence teaching throughout all the experiences of samsara, including the experiences of the post-death state. The pith teaching is this one. Whatever appears in your inner experience or your outer experience, understand it to be the reflections of your own mind. Whatever appearance or experience presents to you in your life or in your death or your after-death state, take those experiences and appearances as the projections of your own mind, as the natural play of your own mind, which has never been separate, never can be, never will be separate from the naturally luminous, empty, pellucid state of the Dharmakaya, the ultimate, the true nature, the Buddha mind. If you never received another teaching during your time on this planet, in this lifetime, and that was the only thing that you ever heard, or the only thing that you remembered from all the things that you had heard or read, if you had only this would be enough. This would be enough. It's the practice of that, of course, that is key. But even before we get to the point, and we're going to work with it during this retreat a bit, even before we get to the point where we have something that we would call methods for putting this into practice, this profound and in some ways very difficult to understand, but in some ways deeply resonant for us. It can be like a talisman that you carry. It can be like an amulet that you wear. It can be like a touchstone in your pocket that reminds you of truth. Even when the mind can't wrap itself around the words and the concepts are slippery and fall away when you try to grasp onto them or make some sense of them, or what you thought you understood from it doesn't seem to be available to you at the moment that you need it, you touch again with your mind, with your memory, those words. Whatever you experience, whatever appearance presents to you in this lifetime, in the process of dying, or in the period after death, understand it to be the natural play of your own mind, the projection of your own mind. Know that there is nothing that is foreign to you in your experience. It is a vast mirror. And at first, what appears to you in that mirror may be great confusion, something frightening, something overwhelming. But as you continue to gaze into that mirror of your own mind, through the experiences and appearances that present themselves to you in this lifetime and after, as you continue to attentively gaze into that mirror, you will see not only your present condition, but eventually also the true nature of your mind, its natural, vast, limitless, substanceless, luminous nature. Having said that, I suppose I could stop right here, but there may be some points of information that might be developed on the basis of that vast river that we just stepped into. So I want to speak first about telling the truth. The translation of this text that I work with is a translation by Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and his colleague Francesca Fremantle. Because I already had been introduced to Padmasambhava and his teachings, both through words and through inner awareness, when I read this text for the first time, and especially when I continued reading it and working with it over a period of many years subsequently, both for my own elucidation and also to work with people in the after-death state, it was inescapable to me that the luminosity of Padmasambhava was present in these pages. And so it's a very heartfelt, moment, the moment in which I'm able to sit with you, friends from all over the world, to touch briefly on some of what is in this text. And I just remembered that I am at the moment breaking a vow, because I've taught this text to very small groups, not in the way that a Lama traditionally trained would teach this text, because I didn't receive that training. I received the training of being in the dying process, apparently, and this was the lifeline that was in my hand, and I used it. And I've used it ever since in just exactly that same way with others who have had the same need. So this is not a person who's trained in working with this process in the traditional Tibetan way. This is an American woman who needed it. And when it came into her hands, she took it. And she has continued to take it over and over again for many years, many decades, actually. But the vow was this, the vow I'm currently breaking. But I reassure you on that point. Garchen Rinpoche at one point said, to the great relief and also some astonishment of many of us sitting in the room, that it's better to take a vow and break it than never to have taken it at all. To take a vow is to bring all one's resources and aspirations to the moment and to see the vast potential of the moment and to make a commitment to bring into that moment and to bring from that moment everything that's possible for one's progress on the path in order to be able to liberate others. So even one moment of gathering that force, the power of that force, is tremendously significant, both for the person who's taking the vow and also for others on the path to see that and to feel the benefit of that. And if we then are not able to keep it, we don't need to feel as if we've failed. What we can say is, oh, I was able to keep it for X days, or I was able to keep it for X number of seconds or minutes, or, oh, I couldn't keep it at all, but I enunciated it. And so the words and their meaning are in my mind. And next time, perhaps I can keep that vow longer. Or maybe I'll take another vow and will be more able to take it further into my life and my practice. So the vow that I made wasn't one of the nature we would call a sacred vow. It was just a vow that I made that I would never teach this text again after the last time I taught it, because it was so upsetting to people. And undoubtedly just my lack of skill and lack of wisdom and lack of maturation, but also it's a challenging text, I must also acknowledge. And those who gathered with me to have some teachings on death and dying, I understood partway through, really wanted to know how to sit by the bedside and help people feel better, and help, help in a very humane and loving way, those friends and family who were dying, but they weren't quite asking for what I was attempting to deliver, which is the truth about all that. The absolute enunciated in the moment of the relative in which we find ourselves, in the particularly rich and sometimes shocking and indescribably gorgeous language of the Tibetan Buddha Dharma, the Vajrayana. So I said after that event, although everybody benefited greatly, ultimately it was so challenging for them because they were tipped directly into the Bardo, and they were overwhelmed for a while. We did climb out. It was good. I didn't lose anyone, but it was challenging. So I said I wouldn't teach the text again. And yet, hello, here we are. I'm not teaching the text, though. Please note, I'm not doing that. I'm wanting to give some of the pith instructions of this text, the Bardo Thotrol. I want to give some of the pith instructions because we are in a Bardo right now. And so I want to read two things that Chogyam Trungpa spoke about in his commentary to this text that I think are very helpful. And so let me just take a sip of tea and find those two pieces that I want to read to you. This touched me very much when I came upon it initially many years ago, and then again just when I was coming to meet with you and thinking about how I wanted to meet with you. Trungpa, from the time he was 8 years old, apparently, was taken to sit with and work with and speak with people who were dying. This is part of his training as a tulku, as a reincarnated lama. And so he was very familiar with the dying state and some of the things that can erupt or shine through. Not necessarily either or, erupting and shining through in that state. But he certainly, when he came to the West, he became very aware of quite a difference in the way his Tibetan compatriots and his new American compatriots relate to death. And he says here in his commentary, it seems that in the Tibetan culture, people do not find death a particularly irritating or difficult situation, but here in the West, we often find it extremely difficult to relate to it. Nobody tells us the final truth. It is such a terrible rejection, a fundamental rejection of love, that nobody is really willing to help a dying person's state of mind. It seems necessary, unless the dying person is in a coma or cannot communicate, that he should be told he's dying. If one is a friend or a husband or wife, then this is the greatest opportunity of really communicating trust. It is a delightful situation that at last somebody really cares about you. Somebody is not playing a game of hypocrisy, is not going to tell you a lie in order to please you, which is what has been happening throughout your whole life. This comes down to the ultimate truth. It is a fundamental trust, which is extremely beautiful. Actually relating with the dying person is very important. Telling him or her that death is not a myth at that point, but that it is actually happening. It is actually happening, but we are your friends, therefore we are watching your death. We know that you're dying, and you know that you're dying. We are really meeting together at this point. That is the finest and best demonstration of friendship and communication. It presents tremendously rich inspiration to the dying person. And the reason that we focus on death in this moment is that the text is used to guide people. It's a guidebook, actually. It's like a roadmap, a blueprint for the 49-day period between death and rebirth. The reason I'm bringing it today is because the experience of approaching death, confronting death, experiencing death, experiencing the dying process, has elements that are with us in every moment of every day. And what we call a bardo is usually translated as gap. It's a gap between the known and the unknown, a gap between that which one thinks one can control and that which one is very obviously not able to control at all. And these moments, these gaps occur all day and all night long for all of us, all the time. And it's how to be with that experience of a break between between how we've been able to understand and live and the threat that this moment that we find ourselves in is a separation from that in some way, is a not just a gap, but a Grand Canyon, and we're about to fall into it. This over and over again confronts us, and over again, we tend to do the same thing with it. For human beings, but not just humans, I think it's in the life of all sentient beings, the ones that we relate to as those we can recognize and know, humans and those in the animal and insect realms, and then by sympathetic imagination, we can also extend our understanding of sentient beings' experience to the 6 samsaric realms of the hell realms and the hungry ghost realms and the jealous god realms, the animal realms and the god realms. And as it's said in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, which, as we know, it contains the entire Buddha Dharma, as it's said in the 37 practices, all suffering without exception comes from wishing for one's own happiness. That's the verse that points us to self-grasping as being the cause of all our suffering. Self-grasping is not just the activities by which we cherish and embellish and elaborate ourselves. It's the original misapprehension, misperception, and misconstruction of experience that has us attribute an intrinsic selfness, an intrinsic existence to this that we experience as I. And I want to say very clearly something that I think I really wish that I had known when I was a child, or maybe a little later than childhood. Perhaps I knew it as a child, and then maybe I got confused. The original misconception or misapprehension or misperception is entirely innocent. It's an entirely innocent error. And that entirely innocent error is the source of all our ignorance, all our attachment, all our hatred. It's the source, in other words, of all our suffering, that ignorance, which means not recognizing the actual nature of reality. And what that means is that we impute to all aspects of reality, starting with I-ness. We then go to you-ness. We think that you also is solid, self-existing. And then all phenomena that are apprehended through the senses, both the gross material senses and the subtle senses, are given the same status as having an actual existence. And yet, the Bardo Thotrol tells us, look at all appearances and experiences as reflections of your own mind. They are projections. They do not exist intrinsically. And some of the proofs of that are in interdependence and impermanence, which I'm going to come to. First, I want to read another brief excerpt from Chogyam Trungpa's commentary. Bardo means gap, he says. It is not only the interval of suspension after we die, but also suspension in the living situation, death happens in the living situation as well. The Bardo experience is part of our basic psychological makeup. There are all kinds of Bardo experiences happening to us all the time, experiences of paranoia and uncertainty in everyday life. It is like not being sure of our ground, not knowing quite what we've asked for or what we're getting into. So this book is not only a message for those who are going to die and those who are already dead, but it is also a message for those who are already born. Birth and death apply to everybody constantly at this very moment. So some of the words that are used in the text to speak about the direct experience of Bardo are, one of the ones that I think is most potent is the word groundlessness. That when the reality that one has been living and actually constructing moment by moment, that's what we're going to talk more about, when that reality breaks, loses its coherence, loses its integrity, falls apart, no longer holds up for you, no longer holds together for you, there can be the experience, as I've experienced it quite often in my life, as if the ground is literally shaking under me. And the shaking then also moves up into the body. And then I become aware of the mind being very shaky. And sometimes for me that presages a significant shift of some sort. Sometimes it just accompanies an experience of loss, impending or actually already being experienced. And sometimes it's just a reflection of confusion. And I remember a moment when I was aware of that experiencing of groundlessness, of the breaking up of the coherent reality that I had been inhabiting. And I saw that not only am I inhabiting that coherent reality, but I'm creating it moment by moment by the way in which I speak to myself in my mind about what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm remembering, what I'm hoping, what I'm fearing. And how each of those broad kind of thought forms or waves can bring with it a concomitant necessity to correct for that which is threatening, or to prolong and intensify or elaborate that which is pleasing in the momentary situation or in my experiencing of it, but more profoundly in my experiencing of myself as coherent, as having integrity, not in the sense of honesty, but completeness and wholeness and coherence. And as I pursued this line of thought, which really attracted my attention and stopped me in my tracks as I was trying to just sort of barrel my way through whatever momentary crisis I thought I was in, as I pursued this line of thought, what I saw was quite surprising. It wasn't something I had thought before. It wasn't a thought in my mind before. It was a new thought. It's amazing how frequently we do not have a new thought. It's amazing how most of the time our thoughts are the old thoughts that we've been having all along, and pulled out of the closet to bolster us, and the ones we haven't been using we dust off and use again. But every now and then there's a new thought. Pay attention to that new thought. So I paid attention to this particular new thought, and the new thought was this: oh, we speak in the Dharma of the three poisons of mind, the three vectors for suffering: ignorance, passion, and aggression. Or we sometimes use the word confusion, grasping or repulsion. And those three vectors are, for grasping, give it to me, I want it. I like it, it's good, I want more, give me more. More, other, better, next. And for repulsion or hatred, don't like it, don't want it, get it away from me, I'm going to kill it. But we don't talk as often about the third one, called ignorance, or often called confusion, sometimes called jealousy, which is instructive too. The new thought that occurred to me as I was looking at all of this, I lived alone in the country, so I had lots of time and space to look at these kinds of things. I suddenly saw that when my mind was confused, didn't know what to think or how to think, didn't know what had happened to what had just fallen away, apparently, and what it was that was presenting itself or coming toward me, or how to understand this experience of there being a gap conceptually between what I knew and what I didn't know, that experience of confusion aroused in me panic, a moment of panic. Not a word that I would normally have applied, but there it was. And I talked with my companion about it. My companion was a companion named Sister. She was a four-legged. She was, in fact, a great bodhisattva being, but she was in that lifetime wearing the body of a dog. And I saw that the same thing happened with her. That a moment of not knowing registers as a kind of panic. And then I kept observing. So I watched in the insect kingdoms that lived very close with me during that period, and with other animals around. And then I observed also with people. But mostly I was watching my own mind to see, well, this is a new thought, let me really understand this. And what I saw was this, very simple, and it's really quite directly related to this core teaching of the Bardo Thotrol, which is whatever arises in your experience, understand it to be a projection of your own consciousness, so the natural play of your own mind, and also the projection of your fears and desires and confusions. So it seemed that what happened, and it still seems to me that this is what happens, because I'm still watching this new thought. That when there is a momentary or extended break in our in the ability of our consciousness to attribute a certain narrative or a certain coherence or a certain self-contained and containing meaning to events or experiences, this panic reaction, it can be so swift and so subtle that we may not notice it. In fact, very often we will not notice it because it is accompanied by, I wouldn't even say followed by practically, it's so quickly the defense moves in. It's accompanied by a committed activity of consciousness to maintain the coherent integrity factors of one's self, one's sense of self. That the threat or the experience of a little break in the cognitive process of explanation and apprehension and understanding and control, therefore, imputed control, is accompanied by a panic as if it's an existential threat, and therefore all the existential markers have to be somehow regathered and put back into place, or new ones grasped to and found and grasped to, so that we are assured again of some kind of a consistent narrative that we can call self. We are assured again of some kind of consistent narrative that we can call self. That narrative is coming from us. We're creating that over and over again. When it appears to break, we patch it up. When it appears to melt away, we try to find sturdy riverbanks that we can run through again. This is just how we do it. There's nothing wrong with it. If what we want is to stay in samsara, if we want to continue to create suffering for ourselves, and if we don't want to continue to create suffering for ourselves, then we need to work with the possibility that self-grasping, grasping to the notion of an intrinsically existing self, is perhaps a faulty notion. Just perhaps. You could pick it up and play with it in your hand a little bit. What about this? Is there any validity to this idea of a self? Let me examine that. You can go to, for example, to verse 22 in the 37 practices. And you can work with the material in that verse to help you examine that. I'm kind of smiling as I'm saying this because it's a smile of loving compassion, both for myself and for you, because this is the very hardest thing that the path will probably ever present to us. The path of the bodhisattva who desires liberation in order to become a liberator of beings. The path of the bodhisattva whose commitment lifetime to lifetime to lifetime is to see truth as it is and to generate the great love that sees all beings as one's own precious dear one, one's own child, to become a mother, father of all, and who lives for others in that profound and vast way. Chogyam Rinpoche teaches so tenderly and so eloquently, over and over again, telling us that our longing for the ultimate state, as long as it is self-grasping, that we want that state for ourselves, we're stepping in our own way, that it is the warmth of our love and compassion for others, both at the relative level, our relative love, our relative compassion, that which we experience in the ordinary run of life, in our relationships with ourselves and others, that our generating of that relative bodhicitta is what melts away the grasping to self that is the only obstacle between our aspiration to see things as they are and our seeing things as they are. Our self-grasping is the only obstacle to our seeing directly the true nature of reality and resting in it, being able to abide in that natural state we call the true nature. So, Bardo moment, whether it's a moment in this lifetime or an extended period in between death and rebirth, that moment, brief or extended, is the moment that is so filled with our potential to not do that which we have always done, to not take the experience or the appearance as something solid that's good or bad or impossible to understand and therefore terrifying, but instead to withhold that reaction that we have always had, to grasp it, to push it away, or to make up a story about it, simply to not do that. Simply, she says, not necessarily easily. Rinpoche's also said many times, to me certainly, and I'm sure to you if you've been studying with him or sitting with him or reading any of his words or seeing him on our YouTube channel, the hardest thing you will ever have to do, the greatest effort you will ever have to make as a practitioner on the path, is the effort to do nothing. And the Bardo practice is essentially the effort of doing nothing, meaning not doing the thing that one always does, which is to grasp at or to push away or negate or to adopt a narrative or elaborate a narrative about what is happening in order to seek one's own comfort, one's own sense of stability and safety and control. But to pay close attention to the bright, clear, perhaps terrifying clarity of the simple isness of event or object or experience. And in that, holding steady in the experience of direct perception of, oh, this here now, in that moment, there is the potential to recognize your own mind. And the other core teaching in the Bardo Thotrol is this simple statement: recognition and liberation are simultaneous. Recognition and liberation are simultaneous. When you see directly the true nature of your mind, you are seeing directly the true nature of all that is, all phenomena, and all absolute. And that moment of direct perception, in that moment, you are, for that moment, liberated. Your mind in that instant, as Rinpoche tells us over and over again, and as other teachers also enunciate so clearly and profoundly, in that moment, your mind is one with the mind of all Buddhas throughout all times. Recognition and liberation are simultaneous. We're going to take a little break. We'll be back in a few minutes. Is that okay, Padma? We're off?